Hello, Zoom folks. I'm going to take a minute to take attendance real quick, and then we'll go ahead and dive into talking about existentialism. All right, thanks for your patience with that. It actually takes me a little bit longer to do when I have to reference in class and in person. Okay, so good morning, quick updates on various things. So on Friday is your exam 2 day. So I need to go in and essentially check and make sure the exam is okay before I release it, but I'm gonna try and do what I did last time and release early. I will be available in person and on Zoom that day. However, since that is right before fall break, I anticipate no one will come in like last time, but I will be here in case you need me, but I'll probably only stay on 5 to 10 minutes if no one comes. And then I'll start my fall break a little early. Nothing wrong with that. So it will be the same format as last time, where we will have the multiple choice and short answers that you fill out on Blackboard, and then the essays that you can download, type, and re-upload. And the essays, I believe, are already accessible. Like I said, I just need to check the multiple choice, and then I'll release those, and y'all will have chances to ask questions about those. Anything else y'all need to be thinking about? I don't think so. We're going to do another discussion on Wednesday. There are 3 readings from the Pieces book. So we're reading stuff by Maslow, by Rogers, and by Csikszentmihalyi. We're going to talk about today. Yeah. Just exam 2.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, and that's a good point, that you will have until next Wednesday to turn everything in.
Oh, wow.
So you have a good amount of time for exam 2. And that just sort of worked out timing wise, but also I feel like with fall break, some people are traveling, some people are trying to get in a lot of work. I know when I was on fall break my senior year, I was like taking the GRE, right? So like fully recognizing you'll have stuff. So it'll be due essentially at class time, or I think I did till midnight that Wednesday. So a week from Wednesday. Other questions?
So the test is Friday?
Yeah, the test is this Friday. I'll probably try to release it by Wednesday like I did last time. And then you'll have essentially a week to finish it. Awesome. Any other questions? Anyone on Zoom?
What's already up, the question portion?
The part where you download it, the essay portion, where you download it and type in. Yeah, before I release the multiple choice, I just need to double check it over, basically, make sure that I covered everything that's on it. Alrighty. So we talked about humanism on Friday, and humanism sort of makes me feel warm and fuzzy, right? It's the idea that like everybody has this potential within themselves and it's great. And just like heads up that existentialism kind of flips it a little bit. And like a lot of similar ideas, interestingly, but like with a more negative slant. So if you've never studied existentialism in philosophy, or like for me, I took French all through high school. So by the time I was a senior, we were reading like Sartre in French. You know, it's gonna be a little shocking and jarring. So just heads up with that. So this is a broad philosophical movement that began in the mid 1800s. So it wasn't just psychology, but it certainly permeated into psychology. And it was a reaction against essentially the Industrial Revolution. The idea that like we could explain everything with rationalism and with science and like make everything with these new machines. Rationalism, existentialists argued, had gone too far in their attempts to account for everything, and in so doing had lost touch with the human experience. So rationalism, basically, it became so popular, it's so overwhelming that it was like we don't even think about individual people before anymore. So the purpose of existentialism, the purpose within existentialism, is to regain contact with the experience of being alive and aware. So here's where we get some of the positive aspects. That's good, right? And it comes from the root words ex, which means out, and stare, which means stand. So the idea was standing out via self-consciousness, self-reflection, choice, responsibility, creativity, and love. So a main question of existentialism is, what does it mean to be human, as opposed to just being a face in the crowd, a brick in the wall, a cog in the wheel? What does it mean to be a human being? And what does it mean when you say, I am? Who are you referring to? Who is I? And what does I am mean? So these quotes at the bottom sort of get at the feeling of the movement. So Sartre said, hell is other people. Again, very uplifting, right? Robert Browning said, take love away and our earth is a tomb. So again, take humanity away and we're sort of like zombies, essentially, right? And Rollo May is actually a psychologist, an existential psychologist. And he said, I am, therefore I blank. So May thought Descartes got it wrong. It wasn't I think, therefore I am. It's like I exist and therefore I can do anything else. My humanity is the most important piece. Now, the dynamics of consciousness here are going to differ pretty greatly from what we've talked about with dynamics with the psychodynamic or Freudian folks. So the dynamics here gives us power. I take responsibility for myself. I take responsibility for my action. Sometimes I have to take responsibility for other people. And acceptance and transcendence were big pieces of this movement. Creativity, love, responsibility, self-reflection, imagination, promise, hope, faith, devotion, and even a relationship with a higher power all flow from these dynamics of consciousness, according to the existentialists. So very similar to the humanists, they're asking, what does it mean to be a human being? A human being what? And May said, that's the point. So this engages us, the dynamics of consciousness engages us in the process of being or of going against being. And Rollo May argues that Hamlet got it wrong. He liked to say everybody got it wrong. And he said, it's not to be or not to be, it's to be and not to be. So this is the idea of dialectics. This is carried forward into a lot of modern therapies as well. And so one of the most important things for existential psychology is the idea of authentic versus inauthentic living. So there are several big conflicts, questions that you have to resolve, essentially. So freedom versus enslavement. Are you going to allow yourself to be enslaved to habits? Allow yourself to be enslaved to external things in your life? Allow yourself to be enslaved to a particular person? Or are you going to step out of that and claim your freedom? Courage versus cowardice. There's a famous quote that says, courage is not the absence of fear, right? There's no courage without fear. The same consciousness that makes us capable of being courageous can also make us cowards. Responsibility versus selfishness. Again, for existentialists, taking responsibility was a huge thing. Not just following along with the crowd, but actively choosing things within your life. Commitment to other people, to ideas versus alienation. And efficacy versus powerlessness, believing you can and should do things rather than just sort of throwing up your hands and saying, what does it matter? So existentialism argues that some people make themselves a brick in the wall because they can't take the uncertainty, the pain, the complexity of daily life decisions. And then that can lead nowhere. And in fact, the Sartre play that Hell is Other People quote comes from is literally translated to no exit. And along those lines, existentialists said these are the existential dilemmas that there is no exit from. Everyone has to confront these in their lives. So death is a big part of this. Fully acknowledging that we all know we're going to die someday, and in the vast majority of cases, we don't know how or when or why that will be. So like one existential therapeutic challenge is to write your own obituary. What would you have stood for? What would you want people to remember you for? And then that can translate into a challenge of how are you going to live to get there? Existentialists argue life has meaning only as it relates to death. Freedom. This is freedom to manage yourself through the power to imagine and the power to create. Sartre said that people are condemned to freedom. And freedom is not just another word for nothing left to lose. It means everything to gain. Again, you break out of the sort of rat race mentality. You can have freedom, but you also have to imagine, have to create. You're then condemned to that. You can never, it's kind of like the Matrix, right? Like once you are broken out of the Matrix, you can never go back to just thinking everything's the same. Isolation and separation. Existentialists argue we are all prisoners within the dynamics of our own consciousness. We are all alone in many ways. And how do we deal with that? The existentialists were the only people to say about love, caring, and giving that these are very important, but fully acknowledged you can get singed by those, right? And in fact, sometimes it's when we love someone that it hurts so much. If anyone watched this show, WandaVision, right? Vision had a quote where he said, what is grief but love enduring, right? And that's why this is a dilemma. Do I allow myself to stay isolated and not make any true connections so that I don't get hurt? Or do I take the risk, find that compassion, find that love, and potentially get hurt later on? And then meaninglessness and purposelessness. This is the power of our minds to understand It's also the power to become confused, right? So like if you let yourself think about things, it's a lot harder than just sort of like going through life, not caring, right? You simultaneously confront each of these dilemmas and transcend it, according to the existentialists. And these dilemmas are the existential dynamic unconsciousness. So this I won't is one of the things that I remember standing out to me the most when I myself learned about this as an undergraduate. So existentialists argue that everything we do is a set of choices, including the choice not to choose, that leads to this just sort of, again, being a brick in the wall, being a cog in the wheel, just sort of going along with things. They would say, if someone asks you like, hey, do you want to go out and do something? And you say, I can't do it. You should instead say, I won't. I will not. It is my choice. I am taking responsibility for that choice. And that's scary. If you imagine saying to your friends who like genuinely want to hang out with you, I will not do that. Not, oh, I can't because I have homework. I'm so sorry. But I'm actively choosing not to do that, right? You are choosing the other thing over them. And that's scary to put out there. That gets into isolation and separation worries, right? But existentialists argue it's more honest. So one of the things that existentialists argue is that if you try to ignore and run from these existential questions, these existential crises, you will pay the price. Your life will be full of meaninglessness, purposelessness, isolation. If you're trying to run from it, you will live a lie. And they call this bad faith. So bad faith is ignoring these existential questions. And to them, it creates three main problems: living a cowardly lie, unhappiness, and they also said it's just not possible not to confront these. But again, by choosing not to confront them, you are making a choice, right? What is not possible is not to choose, says Sartre. If I do not choose, I am still choosing. So the alternative to bad faith is authentic existence, being honest, insightful, and morally correct. Now, this is not perfect. It will not relieve your loneliness and unhappiness. And again, here is the very uplifting existential thought: because every person is alone and doomed. They argue that life has no meaning beyond what you give it, right? So your choice to imbue life with meaning is very important. Authentic existence is the essence of human experience. You have to understand that you will die, and understanding is the price of an authentic life. You're choosing to address all those conflicts and still remain conscious, remain focused, choose to live your life actively with responsibility. So someone living an authentic existence asks, what does life want from me? And they're going to strive to better not only their own condition, but the human condition in general. So being is an act of being something, right? Who are you being? A human being what? And a precursor to this is a term we call Dasein. Da here means there, and sign means being. So being there, being in the moment, being fully aware. When I was an undergrad and took this course, my professor, Michael Levine, told us a great story about his daughter, who was like right on the age where she was starting to really come into awareness of what she was saying and that words had meaning. And he said to her, can you say, I'm a turkey? And she started to say, and she kind of got this gleam in her eye and she said, you a turkey, right? That's the moment of decide. Realizing I don't just have to repeat stuff back. I could figure out what its implications are for me and I can make my choices. And the idea was that there were different layers of experiences that we had. So the biological experience or the Umwelt are the sensations you feel by virtue of being a biological organism. So this is the physical world. Here means around and Welt means world. So the world around you. This is the experience of and your relationship with the natural world, both around you, without, but also within. It's a construct that we refer to in modern psychological terms as interoceptive awareness, knowing what your body's doing, in addition to knowing and realizing what's going on in nature. Then there's the social experience or the Mitwelt. And this is what you think of, or sorry, what you think and feel as a social being. It's your relationship with other people. Mit here means with. And so with world, the world with other people. And so there is one little, it's not a poem, but saying that kind of goes along with this. So we are one person, right? So each of us is a person, each of us is a human being. If we have two people in a relationship, be that friendship, family, romantic, what have you, first we're each a person, right? We are two alone. Okay, the idea here is that we again have these two individuals in the relationship. So second, we're individuals. We are three together. And the idea here is that you have two people, but you also have this third entity, and that's the relationship itself. And in fact, if you do couples therapy or family therapy, what you treat is not the individuals, but that third entity, the relationship among them. And then we are for each other. So we are striving for equality in our relationship, balance, each taking responsibility. Then there's the psychological experience or the Eigenwelt. And this is the experience of experience yourself. So those of you who have taken cognition with Dr. Ariel, you probably learned about metacognition, right? Thinking about thinking, right? Remembering about remembering. This is that. And it's also the experience of introspection into your own world. So how you experience, create your identity, your creativity, your coping, your commitment. It's our experience of and our construction of meaning in the world. So Eigen here means own or one. So own world, one world. And what existentialists argue is that we all exist simultaneously in all three of these worlds. And that, again, because it's existential, we also fail to exist on all three levels. We don't take care of the natural world, the environment, our own internal workings, right? In relationships, we often try to dominate and exploit other people. And we disrespect our own bodies, our own ideas, and choose not to create, express, and value what's going on. Another construct that they talk about is thrownness. So thrownness is the time, place, and circumstances into which you happen to be born. Time, place, and circumstances. You can't control this. It's just where you happen to be born, when you happen to be born, who you happen to be born to, right? My daughter was born on June 14th. That happens to be Trump's birthday. So I also Harriet Beecher Stowe birthday and Flag Day. So I focus on those instead, right? And she was born during the Trump administration. And that's one thing we thought about. Like, do we want to bring a child to the world right now? And we decided, yeah, that we thought we could do a good job regardless of what was happening in the government, right? But we also have the financial wherewithal to support a child. And we're both very committed to, active parenting. Not all children get that opportunity, right? Some kids are born into poverty, some kids are abandoned. When the one child policy still existed in China, if you were born a girl or if you were born sickly in any way, they would sometimes like take you and leave you on a mountain to die. Things along those lines. You can't control that, right? These are just the circumstances you are born into. So this is an important basis of your existence, and you're just being thrown into it. And they argued, again, because they were most concerned by science and rationality and the Industrial Revolution, that being thrown into modern society where again, this predates the internet, right, and all social media and all that, but you could hear that echo now, right? Into a modern society where everyone's sort of disconnected and disjointed, right? They argued that is particularly difficult. It used to be if you were born into the Middle Ages, right or wrong, religion gave your life meaning, right? For a lot of folks now, religion doesn't serve that same purpose, right? And that can mean that you have to make your own meaning, and that can be really challenging for some folks. And they argued that modern substitutes for religion have failed to provide an alternate worldview to tell us why we're here and what we should do. So then again, you're having to figure that out for yourself. And they argued that angst is something that comes as a result. Angst is the unpleasant feeling caused by contemplating the meaning of life and thinking about how you should spend your time. Some of you may be experiencing some angst right now, right? Because this stuff is weird to think about. So they argue there are different aspects of angst. One is anguish. Everyone feels this at some point because our choices are never going to be perfect, right? There's always going to be regret. Forlornness. Each person has to make their own choices, and that can be really challenging. And then despair, knowing that outcomes like your thrownness are outside of your control. So they argued that our moral imperative is to face thrownness and angst directly, and that requires existential courage, or what is sometimes called optimistic toughness or resiliency, which we'll talk about in a couple slides. All right, so I have a quick video of Rollo May talking about some of these concepts.
Psychotherapy is facing a very profound crisis. I think the teaching of the fathers, Freud and Jung and Rank and Adler, has been in this crisis almost completely lost. And the problem is that psychotherapy becomes more and more a system of gimmicks. People have special ways of doing their own therapy. They learn which particular buttons to push. They're taught various techniques by which they can so that they can at least cure this isolated symptom or that. Now that wasn't the purpose at all of Freud and Jung and the rest of the really great men who began our field. Their purpose was to make the unconscious conscious. And there's a great deal of difference between that. Now the gimmick approach leads to a general boredom. And the reason there are so many new systems of psychotherapy that spring up, every time you turn around, there's a new system. 300 or 400 now that exists of this kind of therapy, that kind. The reason that this happens is that people are simply bored. As a therapist are bored. And they have to find some new gimmick in order to make it amusing, at least to them. Now they're bored because they deal with the minor problems of life. They patch a person up and send him out again. I don't regard that as real therapy at all. The therapy that is important, as I see it, is the therapy that enlarges the person, makes the unconscious conscious. It enlarges our view, it enlarges our experience, makes us more sensitive, it enlarges our intellectual capacities as well as other capacities. Now this is what Freud was setting out to do. It's what Jung was trying to do. So Adler and Otto Rank, these people never talk about these gimmicks. It just didn't interest them. What did interest them was making a new person.
So obviously he's quite cynical about modern therapy. I would argue that a lot of modern therapists are just trying to make therapy more effective, and that's why they come up with new techniques. But it's an interesting perspective. All right, so next person we're going to talk about is Csikszentmihalyi, and again, you're going to do a reading by him for Wednesday. And so he really focused in on this concept of flow or optimal experience. This is how to make the most of your moment-to-moment experience, because the moment-to-moment experience is what really matters in life. He talked about autotelic activities, activities that are enjoyable for their own sake. And he said, this is the best way to spend your time, is doing stuff that is just enjoyable. And flow is the subjective experience of an autotelic activity. It's characterized by tremendous concentration, lack of distractibility, and thoughts concerning the only activity at hand. Flow is also characterized by mood that is slightly elevated and time seeming to pass very quickly. Flow has other words and terms in modern society. So runner's high, for example, is an example of flow. Csikszentmihalyi argued that flow arises when the challenges of an activity match a person's skills. And the secret for enhancing your quality of life was to spend as much time in flow as possible. However, flow is often solitary. So then we get to the existential crisis of isolation, right? And one of the things that's really interesting within my own research, as I do some work with objectification theory, and one of the things that has found in objectification theory is just seeing yourself as an object, focusing on your body so much you don't see yourself as a person. People who are high on that have a really hard time entering flow because you're so focused on your own appearance that you can't get into this. So it can actually disrupt your ability to experience this. So going back to the idea, I do have a Csikszentmihalyi video. I forgot I found this, which is great. So he's still, no, wait, I looked it up. He died in 2021. So he just recently passed. So he actually, if you're interested in more of what he has to say, he has TED Talks and whatnot. And this is just a short version that I found. But I thought it was, again, really interesting to see someone talk in their own voice about their ideas.
Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, the well-known father of positive psychology, was born in Fiume in 1934, the son of the Hungarian consul. The family left Hungary in 1944 and moved to Rome, where they operated a small restaurant. The young Csikszentmihalyi did not like Italy and emigrated to the United States. He was interested in painting, and he worked and attended university lectures at the University of Chicago. Later, he became
Just real quick, for anyone who's an artist, you could see why someone who is a painter might get the idea about flow, because oftentimes if you're creating a creative work, you get into that sort of headspace.
head of the psychology department there. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi wrote his doctoral dissertation in the field of creativity. This led him to the understanding of the phenomenon of happiness, which he describes as flow experience, in one of his articles written in 1972. The theory became widespread only after 1988. Several of Csikszentmihalyi's books have been published in Hungarian. The Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience, and The Evolving Self. His books have been translated into more than 30 languages. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi is a member of both the American Academy of Sciences and the Hungarian Academy of Sciences.
Flow is a state of mind or an experience, a state of experience that we feel when we're totally involved in what we're doing. I began to notice how important this feeling is in the arts, for instance, for painters or musicians who, when a painter begins to fill a white canvas, a canvas with nothing on it, and he or she begins to put colors on this canvas and begins to develop a shape, develop a painting that will be important to them and to the public. The artist completely loses track of the time. They don't notice they're hungry, they're tired. They are just sometimes working for days without stopping. And that feeling that then they try to explain it to someone who wasn't involved in the painting, and they explain it as being completely carried away, almost like being in a river and the flow of the water takes them on. The state of mind has the same characteristics. Everybody describes it as being very focused, very clear goals, immediate feedback to the action, and balance of challenges and skills. So this is the experience of flow as they describe it in art, in sports, in music, and every time a person is really involved in what they're doing. For instance, one of the most successful examples is a Swedish company called Green Cargo, which has been losing money for 125 years, and every year losing money. Partly, the only way they could afford that was that they were a government company of transportation, which were state-owned. And then a person who learned about flow became the human resource manager for Green Cargo, and he started applying flow principles in that company. And it turned out that after 2 years, for the first time in 125 years, Green Cargo made a profit, and since then, apparently it's making still profit. But that's not the only company. There are many. Microsoft is using it. There is a company here close to Los Angeles, Patagonia, which makes clothes for outdoors for sports people. And that's a very good example of a company that is able to introduce flow in the work.
So again, having implications for like IO psychology as well. All right, so hardiness. This was a psychologist whose last name was Maddie who came up with this. The idea here is that stress is not always bad. Without stress, life would be boring and meaningless. So many people seek to avoid stress by developing a conformist, comfortable lifestyle. And this is likely to lead to existential psychological pathology or a false sense of self. So this idea is essentially bad faith. Vegetativeness is where the person feels that nothing has meaning, and because listless and aimless, this is a symptom of depression. But Maddie argued that this is the most severe kind of existential pathology. Nihilism is where your experience is dominated by anger, disgust, and cynicism. Nihilism is slightly less severe than vegetativeness, but more common. So when only extreme thrills garner your full attention and distract from your deep feelings of meaninglessness, that can lead to problematic things. So it can lead to promiscuous sex, dangerous drug use, and Maddie argued that people are just trying to fill or conceal the emptiness of life with these things sometimes. So hardiness is a cure for bad faith. It's a lifestyle that embraces rather than avoids potential sources of stress. Hardiness argues that stressful and challenging experiences can bring learning, growth, and wisdom, and that they're important for giving meaning to life, and that this is related to happiness and adjustment. If you are hardy, you can experience control over your own life, committed, so choosing to be committed to something, change, the idea that life is change and growth and process, choice, making choices in your own life. Again, things that the existentialists love. Challenge, life is challenging, life is invigorating. And so if you think about someone who has control, commitment, choice, change, challenge, this is pretty close to Roger's description of the fully functioning person. So what are the similarities here? Why do I lump existentialism and humanism into one big lecture? Well, one that you've heard me emphasize a couple times is the human being, or the human in the process of being. What are we being? Existence precedes essence, says Sartre. That we exist, and then we got to figure it out, right? Everybody exists. Everybody has thrownness. Everybody has the circumstance they're born to, which can thwart the OAT and the OVT. Being as a participle, being as a verb. We are born of consciousness and responsibility and will. And people from both sides would argue that we need to own those things. And being itself is seen as an act of individual creation that's marked by continual responsibility and those really difficult choices. All righty, so that is it for this lecture. So we can wrap up there for today. And I will see everybody on Wednesday.
We have another reading.
Yes, so there are 3 readings in the pieces book.